It was a bright morning in London, and the streets near Buckingham Palace were filled with people as usual. Tourists held up their phones, hoping to capture the famous sight of the King's Guards standing tall in their bright red uniforms and large black hats. Families, school children, and visitors from all over the world watched with excitement, waiting to see the traditional changing of the guard ceremony. But something was different today. A hush fell over the crowd as people noticed the soldiers marching out of the gates. Instead of their usual red and gold uniforms, the guards were dressed in full camouflage gear. Their dark green and brown uniforms blended with the surroundings, making them look like real army soldiers instead of the ceremonial guards everyone was used to seeing. Instead of their usual polished boots and white gloves, they wore tactical gear, sturdy combat boots, and protective vests. Some carried modern rifles, and their faces looked more serious than ever. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. "What's going on?" a tourist asked, nudging his friend. "Are they preparing for something?" An elderly woman murmured. Children tugged on their parents' sleeves, asking why the guards looked different. Even the Londoners, who had seen the King's Guard hundreds of times before, had never witnessed anything like this. A group of journalists standing nearby began snapping photos and taking notes. News channels received live updates as the images of the camouflaged guards flooded social media. Some people speculated that it was a special training day. Others wondered if there was a serious reason behind the change. Was there a hidden danger no one was talking about? For years, the King's Guard had been a symbol of tradition, discipline, and national pride. They stood motionless at their posts, never reacting to tourists who tried to make them smile or laugh. Their purpose had always seemed ceremonial, a grand display of British heritage. But today, everything felt different. These soldiers looked ready for action. A little boy, sitting on his father's shoulders, pointed at the guards and asked, "Are they going to war?" His father chuckled nervously, unsure how to answer. A nearby police officer, hearing the question, simply smiled and said, "They're just doing their duty." But even he seemed a little unsure. As the guards took their positions, their movements were precise and disciplined. There was no music, no fancy display, just the quiet, powerful presence of highly trained soldiers. Their eyes scanned the surroundings, alert and focused. It was clear that this was not just for show. People kept watching, waiting for something to happen. But the guards remained silent, standing tall as always. The air was filled with curiosity, tension, and an unspoken question. Why had the King's Guard suddenly changed? Whatever the reason, one thing was certain. Something was happening behind the grand walls of Buckingham Palace, and the world was about to find out. Behind the grand walls of Buckingham Palace, a secret meeting was taking place. Inside a large room filled with important officials, military leaders, and security experts, the atmosphere was tense. A large screen in the middle of the room displayed maps, reports, and live surveillance footage from different locations around the city. Everyone in the room knew that something serious was happening. A high-ranking officer cleared his throat and spoke in a firm voice. "We have received intelligence about a possible threat. It's not confirmed yet, but we cannot take any risks." The room fell silent. The officials exchanged glances, their faces showing concern. The safety of the king, the royal family, and the people of London was their top priority. For years, the King's Guards had been a ceremonial unit, known for their discipline and tradition. But today, things were different. The guards had been placed on high alert. Their sudden change in uniform was not just for show, it was a necessary step to ensure security. If there was even the slightest danger, they had to be prepared. Outside the palace, tourists continued to watch the guards with curiosity. Some people had started live streaming the scene, sharing their thoughts online. News reporters stood near the gates, trying to gather information. Why the sudden change? One reporter asked a security officer. The officer gave a short response, routine security measures, before walking away quickly. But behind the scenes, it was anything but routine. Special intelligence teams were monitoring different locations, looking for any suspicious activity. Every movement near the palace was being watched closely. Hidden cameras, drones, and undercover officers blended into the crowd, keeping an eye on everything. Meanwhile, inside a training facility not far from London, a select group of King's Guards was undergoing special drills. Unlike the guards outside, these soldiers were in a hidden location, practicing real combat scenarios. They were being trained for situations they had never faced before: quick response tactics, emergency evacuations, and high-risk defense strategies. Their instructors pushed them to their limits, reminding them that they were no longer just ceremonial guards. They were now an active force ready to protect the monarchy and the nation. Back at the palace, a black car with tinted windows arrived at a side entrance. A senior intelligence officer stepped out, holding a confidential file. He was immediately escorted inside, where the meeting was still in progress. He placed the file on the table and said, "We may have more information. We need to act fast." The officials leaned in, reading the latest reports. Their expressions grew more serious. Something was happening, something bigger than anyone had expected. Outside, the guards in camouflage remained at their posts, their eyes scanning the streets. The city continued as usual, but those who paid close attention could feel it. Change was in the air. And whatever was coming next, the King's Guards were ready. The sun had started to set over London, casting a golden glow over Buckingham Palace. The tourists who had gathered earlier in the day had slowly begun to leave, but the sight of the King's Guards in camouflage remained fresh in their minds. Social media was filled with pictures and videos, and news channels had started reporting on the unusual change. Inside the palace, the tension had not eased. The secret meeting between security officials and military leaders was still ongoing. The new intelligence report had raised more concerns. Although no specific attack had been confirmed, the information suggested that something unusual was happening in the city. There were whispers of suspicious activities, unknown figures seen near important locations, and encrypted messages intercepted by intelligence agencies. "We cannot take this lightly," a senior officer said, his voice firm. "If we wait too long, we could put the king and the royal family in danger. We need to be ready for anything." The decision was made. The King's Guards would continue their duty in full military gear, but that was not all. A highly trained special unit, hidden from the public eye, would be placed inside the palace grounds. These men were not just soldiers, they were experts in handling emergencies. Their orders were simple: protect the king and his family at all costs. Outside, the guards in camouflage stood motionless, their eyes scanning the surroundings. Unlike the usual routine, they were now following a new pattern. Every few minutes, one of them would move, checking different spots, ensuring no area was left unguarded. Their weapons were not just for show anymore. They were prepared for real action. A short distance away, near a quiet alley, an officer dressed in civilian clothes spoke into a hidden earpiece. "No unusual movement so far," he reported. But just as he finished speaking, his eyes caught something: a figure standing near a lamppost, watching the palace closely. The figure quickly turned away and disappeared into the crowd. The officer didn't waste time. He signaled to a nearby team, who immediately started tracking the mysterious person. They moved through the busy streets, their training allowing them to blend in effortlessly. The figure had vanished, but the officer knew one thing for sure: someone was watching the palace. Meanwhile, inside a military training facility outside the city, a special group of King's Guards continued their intense drills. Unlike the traditional ceremonies, these soldiers were being prepared for real threats. They practiced how to handle dangerous situations, how to respond to sudden attacks, and how to protect the king in an emergency. Their instructors reminded them, "You are no longer just guards. You are protectors." Back at the palace, the night air was cool, but the atmosphere remained heavy. The King's Guards continued to stand tall, their presence a silent message. They were ready. Whatever was coming, they would not be caught off guard. The city of London had settled into the quiet of the night, but inside Buckingham Palace, the tension remained. The King's guards, dressed in full camouflage gear, stood at their posts, more alert than ever. Their eyes scanned every shadow, every movement in the distance. Although the streets outside seemed calm, the guards knew that appearances could be deceiving. Inside the palace security room, multiple screens displayed live footage from cameras placed around the palace grounds and nearby streets. Officers monitored every angle, searching for anything out of the ordinary. The earlier sighting of the mysterious figure near the lamppost had raised concerns. Although the person had disappeared, security officials knew that it wasn't just a coincidence. Someone was watching the palace closely, and they needed to find out why. A senior officer, dressed in a dark suit, walked into the room and addressed the security team. "We cannot afford any mistakes," he said firmly. "From now on, every movement must be tracked. No one enters or exits the palace without clearance." Meanwhile, a special group of guards had been assigned to patrol the area in pairs. Unlike their usual silent stance, these guards were moving, checking different spots, and keeping a close watch on anything unusual. A few guards walked past the palace gates, their boots making soft but firm sounds on the pavement. Even though they didn't say a word, their body language showed that they were ready for anything. A few streets away, a black SUV moved slowly, its headlights dimmed. Inside the vehicle, a team of intelligence officers monitored their communication devices. They were tracking a possible lead, a suspicious vehicle that had been spotted circling the palace earlier in the evening. "Keep your distance," one of the officers said. "We don't want to alert them just yet." Back inside the palace, the king himself was aware of the heightened security. Although he continued his usual evening routine, he had been briefed about the situation. He trusted his security team, but he also understood that this was not a normal night. He glanced out of the window, looking at the guards in their camouflage gear. It was a rare sight, but it reassured him. His guards were not just ceremonial figures. They were trained soldiers, ready to protect. In a hidden training facility outside the city, another group of elite King's guards continued their intense exercises. They practiced emergency evacuation drills, rapid response tactics, and defensive strategies. Their instructors pushed them hard, reminding them that they might be called into action at any moment. "You are not here for show," one instructor said. "You are here to defend." Back in London, the clock struck midnight, but the guards did not relax. The streets remained quiet, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. The security teams knew that they were in the middle of something big, something unseen. They just didn't know when or how it would unfold. But one thing was certain: the King's guards were ready. The city was quiet, but inside Buckingham Palace, every guard and security officer remained on high alert. The strange activities around the palace over the past few days had created a sense of unease. The King's guards, dressed in full camouflage gear, continued their watch, their eyes scanning the dark streets. The bright lights of London made it difficult to spot anything suspicious, but their training had taught them to notice even the smallest details. In the palace security room, the officers were still reviewing footage from earlier in the evening. The sighting of the mysterious figure near the lamppost had not been forgotten. The intelligence team had tried to track the person using surveillance cameras, but he had disappeared into the crowd. Whoever they were, they knew exactly where the cameras were positioned, one officer said, frowning. This wasn't just a random bystander. A special team of guards had been assigned to patrol the hidden areas of the palace, places where no tourists or visitors were allowed to go. These were sensitive spots, secret exits, underground tunnels, and service entrances. If anyone wanted to sneak into the palace unnoticed, these were the places they would target. The guards checked every corner, their movements silent but precise. Outside the palace gates, a small group of reporters had gathered, hoping to get a statement from security officials. The unusual sight of the King's guards in camouflage had sparked countless questions. People wanted to know if the royal family was in danger. But the officers stationed at the entrance gave no answers. "No comments," one of them said firmly, waving the reporters away. The media could speculate all they wanted, but the truth was something only a few people knew. A few streets away, the intelligence team tracking the suspicious vehicle was still in pursuit. The black SUV had followed a car that had been circling the palace earlier, keeping a safe distance. "They're stopping near an alley," an officer reported. The team inside the SUV exchanged quick glances. "Stay alert," their leader said. "We're moving in." Back inside Buckingham Palace, the king was preparing to retire for the night. His personal security detail had doubled, and additional guards had been stationed near his chambers. The king understood that something serious was happening, but he trusted his team. As he glanced out of the window once more, he saw the camouflaged guards standing in position, their presence unwavering. He knew they would not let anything happen to him or his family. Meanwhile, in the hidden training facility outside London, the special unit of King's Guards continued their drills. They practiced rapid response techniques, close combat tactics, and emergency evacuation procedures. Their instructors pushed them harder than ever. "You might be called in at any moment," one of them reminded the soldiers. "Be ready." As the night stretched on, the tension in the air remained thick. The guards at the palace stood firm, waiting. They didn't know what was coming, but they knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened, they would be prepared. The clock struck 2 a.m., and the streets of London were nearly empty. The city, which had been buzzing with activity during the day, was now quiet. But inside Buckingham Palace, the silence was deceiving. The King's Guards remained at their posts, their camouflage gear blending into the dimly lit surroundings. Every guard was alert, watching, waiting. Inside the palace security room, the officers continued monitoring the surveillance cameras. The team tracking the suspicious vehicle had lost sight of it for a few moments, but now it had reappeared. It was parked near a side street, just a short distance from the palace. The officers exchanged serious glances. "They're watching," one of them said. "But why?" Just as he spoke, another officer noticed something unusual on the security feed. A shadow moved near one of the palace's restricted entrances, an area not usually accessed by the public. The movement was small, almost unnoticeable, but to a trained eye, it was clear. Someone was there. "Zoom in on that camera," the lead officer ordered. The screen adjusted, focusing on the dark corner near the gate. For a second, there was nothing. Then suddenly, a figure appeared, stepping briefly into view before disappearing again. "Someone's testing the security," an officer muttered. Without hesitation, the security team sprang into action. A group of specially trained guards was sent to investigate. Unlike the ceremonial guards standing outside, these men were part of an elite unit, skilled in handling high-risk situations. They moved quickly but silently, their weapons ready, their eyes sharp. As they approached the restricted area, they signaled to one another, moving into formation. One of them pointed toward the shadows where the figure had last been seen. Carefully, they advanced, checking every possible hiding place. But when they reached the spot, it was empty. Whoever had been there was gone. Back in the security room, the officers checked the footage again, rewinding and playing it in slow motion. The figure had appeared for only a second, but it was enough to confirm one thing. This was no accident. Someone had deliberately come close to the palace, testing how quickly security would respond. Meanwhile, the intelligence officers tracking the suspicious vehicle made a move. The black SUV pulled up behind the parked car, and two plainclothes officers stepped out. They approached carefully, their hands near their radios, ready to call for backup. But as they got closer, the car's engine roared to life. Within seconds, it sped away, disappearing down the empty streets of London. The officers rushed back to their SUV. "Follow them," their leader ordered. The chase had begun. Back at the palace, The guards returned to their positions, but the air was heavy with tension. Someone had come close, too close. The question was, what were they planning? One thing was certain, this was not over. The king's guards knew they had to be ready for whatever came next. The night was still, but inside Buckingham Palace, the tension was rising. The king's guards, standing in full camouflage gear, remained at their posts, their senses sharp. They knew something wasn't right. Someone had tested the security, disappearing before they could be caught. And now, the intelligence team was in the middle of a high-speed chase, trying to track down the mysterious vehicle that had been watching the palace. Inside the palace security room, officers carefully analyzed the footage again. The figure that had appeared near the restricted entrance was skilled, moving quickly, staying in the shadows, and avoiding the cameras as much as possible. This was no ordinary intruder. Whoever it was, they had experience. A senior officer turned to his team. We need to increase patrols around the entire perimeter. No one comes in or out without being checked. His voice was firm. The guards had been trained for situations like this. Now, they had to prove that they were ready. Meanwhile, on the streets of London, the intelligence officers chasing the suspicious car were pushing their vehicle to the limit. The dark car they were following weaved through the nearly empty streets, trying to lose them. But the officers were trained for this. They stayed close, following every turn. Cut them off ahead, the leader of the team said into his radio. Another team had already positioned themselves on the next street, ready to block the vehicle's escape. As the car sped forward, the second team suddenly appeared, blocking the road with their own vehicle. There was no way out. The suspicious car screeched to a stop. The intelligence officers jumped out of their vehicles, surrounding it. "Step out of the car, hands where we can see them," one officer commanded. But there was no response. The officers approached cautiously, weapons ready. When they finally opened the door, they were shocked. The car was empty. The driver had escaped, leaving the vehicle behind. Back at the palace, the guards remained alert. Although they didn't know what was happening in the city, they could feel the weight of the night pressing down on them. They stood strong, knowing that their duty was more than just standing guard. It was protecting something much greater. In the hidden training facility outside London, the special unit of the King's Guards was being briefed. Their commander stood before them, holding a report. "Something is happening," he told them. "We don't know the full details yet, but we have to be ready. If we are called in, we move fast, no questions asked." The soldiers nodded, tightening the straps on their gear. They had been trained for this moment. They knew that the next few hours could change everything. Back in London, the intelligence officers searched the abandoned car, looking for clues. A single note was left on the seat, with just 4 words written on it. "This is just beginning." At Buckingham Palace, the King's Guards remained motionless, their eyes scanning the darkness. Something was coming, and they would be ready. The night was almost over, but the tension inside Buckingham Palace had not eased. The King's Guards, standing firm in their camouflage gear, knew that something was about to happen. The strange figure near the restricted entrance, the suspicious car that had escaped, and the mysterious note left behind. It all pointed to one thing. This was not a random event. Someone was planning something big. Inside the palace security room, officers continued their investigation. The intelligence team had taken the abandoned car for a detailed search, but apart from the note, nothing else was found. No fingerprints, no personal belongings. Whoever was behind this knew how to cover their tracks. The words on the note, "This is just beginning," echoed in everyone's mind. A senior officer turned to his team. "We can't wait for them to make the next move. We need to act now." Immediately, more guards were deployed around the palace, and security checkpoints were doubled. Every vehicle passing near the area was monitored. Meanwhile, plainclothes intelligence officers spread out into the city, searching for any possible lead. They questioned people, checked security camera footage from nearby areas, and tried to retrace the movements of the mysterious car's driver. The king had been informed of the situation, and although he remained calm, he understood the seriousness of the threat. He trusted his guards and security team, knowing that they would do everything to protect him and his family. As he looked out of his window at the guards standing in the early morning light, he felt a sense of gratitude. These men were not just soldiers. They were protectors willing to put their lives on the line for his safety. Meanwhile, in the hidden training facility outside London, the special unit of the King's Guards prepared themselves. Their commander had received new orders. Be ready for immediate deployment. The soldiers checked their equipment one last time. They didn't know when they would be called, but they knew that it could be at any moment. Back in London, as the first rays of sunlight touched the palace walls, something unexpected happened. A young officer monitoring the security footage noticed a small detail that had been missed earlier. He quickly zoomed in and played the video in slow motion. "There," he said, pointing at the screen. The footage showed